Today's assignment is going to be IXL section K9, where we're going to be graphing solutions to two-step linear inequalities. It's basically the same thing we did last class, but we're also graphing it, which we've done it before. So I'm going to go through 10 different examples here. By now, you should be pretty good at this. So in all our examples, we have to get the variable by itself. So I have 10 plus 3t less than or equal to 4. My goal is to get the letter t by itself, the variable t by itself. So the number that's with the variable, I'm going to move last. The first thing I'm going to get rid of is the 10 by subtracting 10 from both sides of the inequality. All right, right here, 10 minus 10 cancels out. The 3t stays by itself on the left, and I still got this same sign in the middle. Now 4 minus 10 is negative 6. Okay, now I'm still trying to get rid of that 3. So to get rid of it, I'm going to do the opposite of multiplying by 3, which will be divide both sides by 3. So when I divide both sides by 3, these 3's cancel out, and I'm going to be left with t is less than or equal to. Negative 6 divided by positive 3 is negative 2. That's my answer, and I also got to graph it. Okay, so here's negative 2. Now the line on the bottom means that it could be equal to negative 2, so I'm going to shade it in. And t represents a number. We do not know what it is, but the number could be less than negative 2 or equal to negative 2. All the numbers less than negative 2 are to the left. So there's my graph. Here's another easy example where I got to get c by itself. So again, the number that's with the variable, I'm going to move it last. The first thing I'm going to do is move the number 1 to the right. And the way I'm going to do it is by doing the opposite of adding 1, which will be subtracting 1 from both sides. Okay, so when I do that, I'm going to have 4c is less than or equal to 8. And now my last step is to, let me just write it here. To get rid of that 4 by doing the opposite of multiplying by 4, which will be dividing both sides by 4. Alright, so when I divide both sides by 4, these 4's cancel out, so c is going to be less than or equal to 2. That's my answer, and then to do the graph, here's positive 2. This line tells me that it could be equal to positive 2. So I'm going to shade inside the 2. And c is a number. I don't know what it is, but it could be less than or equal to positive 2. All the numbers less than are this way to the left. So there's my graph. Okay, now in this one, we're going to see the situation that I tell you that the one thing you always have to watch out for when you're dealing with inequalities. And that is that if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, the sign flips directions. That's the number one thing you always should watch out for when you have inequalities. That's the only thing that's different from when you have an equation. All right, so there's my problem. Okay, again, the number that's with the variable, I'm going to move last. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the plus 9 by subtracting 9 from both sides. Okay, once I do that, I'm going to get 5 minus 9, which is negative 4. And over here I got negative 2r. Okay, now I have to get rid of the negative 2 by doing the opposite of multiplying by negative 2, which will be dividing both sides by negative 2. And when I do that, the sign has to flip directions, because whenever you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, when you have inequalities, the sign flips directions. Okay, so this is going to cancel out right here, and it's going to be r. I'm going to flip the sign like that. I flipped the sign. This became this. And negative 4 divided by negative 2 is positive 2. And that is my answer. So r is less than or equal to 2. I believe that's the graph I just did a second ago. So here it is again. Okay, all the numbers less than 2 are this way, to the left. Let's look at another example. Same thing, except now they have the variable on the right side of the inequality, but it's the same thing. So here's my problem. I like to repeat things so that it'll get stuck in your brain and you can never get rid of it. If it's a good thing, if it's a good habit, that's a good thing, okay? So the number that's with the variable, I'm going to move last. I'm going to first get rid of this number right here by doing the opposite of, you could think about this as -1. The opposite of -1 is +1. Adding 1 is the only thing that's going to get rid of that number. Nothing else that you could do would get rid of this number from the right side of the inequality. So -1 plus 1 is 0. That cancels out. 7 plus 1 is 8. So now I have 8. I have the same sign, and I have 2p. Now, as you can see, now I have to, I'm laughing because that sounded funny. I said I have 2p. Never mind. Bad joke. All right, so I want to get the variable p by itself. So I'm going to move the 2 to the other side and do 8 divided by 2. All right, so 8 divided by 2 is 4. All right, so to make it easier to read, you should always read it starting with the variable. So since the variable is on the right, I should read it right to left, and it'll make more sense. But let me write it that way. P is greater than 4. P is greater than 4. Notice if I switch their sides, I got to keep the same relationship. The big side of the alligator mouth is pointing towards the P, and the little side towards the 4. So if I switch their sides, I got to keep that same, I got to keep the sign the same way. With the big side pointed towards the P, and the little side towards the 4. Okay, P is greater than 4. P is greater than 4. All right, so it cannot equal 4, so I'm not going to shade inside the circle. And since P is a number, I do not know what it is, but it's bigger than 4. All right, all the numbers possible that are bigger than 4 are to the right. So I got to shade to the right. Okay, next one. Another easy one where I want to get the m by itself. Okay, so first thing, the number that's with the variable, I'm going to move it last. So the first thing I'm going to get rid of is that 7 by subtracting 7 from both sides. 8 minus 7 is 1. All right, and I'm going to bring down the m divided by 2. Okay, now to get rid of that 2, the fast way is to just write that you're multiplying by 2 over here. That's fine. I write it like that all the time. But just to make sure we realize that we're doing the same thing to both sides, since you're dividing by 2, the opposite operation would be to multiply both sides by 2. So that'll give me m is greater than or equal to 2. That's my answer, and I'm going to graph it again. Here's 2. Since it could be equal to, I got to shade inside the circle, and all the numbers greater than 2 are to the right. Okay, there's my graph. This one's also easy. You want to get the variable f by itself. So the number that's with the variable, I'm going to move last. So the first thing I'm going to move is that plus 10 by doing the opposite of plus 10, which is subtract 10 from both sides. Right here, 4 minus 10 is going to give you negative 6. 4 minus 10 is negative 6. So I got 3f on this side. So now to move that 3 so that the f will be by itself, just divide both sides by 3. If I divide both sides by 3, the 3's cancel out. So I'm going to have f is less than negative 6 divided by positive 3 is negative 2. That's my answer. Let me write it an easier way to read, which would be that f is less than negative 2. All right, so here's negative 2. I'm not going to shade inside the circle because it cannot equal negative 2. And all the numbers less than negative 2 are to the left. A couple more examples. Okay, now in this one, we've seen one like this before. It could be a little tricky, so let's look at it. Here's our problem, and we're trying to get the variable n by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do, okay, this one, there's two ways to do it, all right? I'll explain both ways. First thing I want to remind you, I've said it before, imagine that there's an invisible 1 here. There is an invisible 1 there. So let me just write it just to make it easier to explain the long way of doing this. The long way is the number that's in front of the variable, you move last. Let's first get rid of the plus 19 by subtracting 19 from both sides. 15 minus 19 is negative 4. Okay, and right here I got, let's say, negative 1n. Okay, now I want to get rid of that negative 1, so it'll just be a positive n by itself. And the way to get rid of it is to do the opposite of multiplying by negative 1, which would be dividing both sides by negative 1. But you have to remember, if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative number, the sign flips. So in this case, the sign is going to flip. I'm running out of space, so let me just go over here. The sign is going to flip to that. Okay? Negative 4 divided by negative 1 is positive 4. Negative 1 divided by negative 1 is positive 1. So this cancels out, and I'm just left with n. So that says n is greater than 4. That's your answer. N is greater than 4. Here's 4. All the numbers greater than are to the right. Now let me do the same thing, but a quicker way. The quicker way is like this. The quicker way is basically there's not a number in front of n. I mean, yes, there's an invisible 1 there, all right? But since it looks like that with no other number here, okay, what I could just do is let's just move n to the left, and it's going to become positive. When I move it to the left, it becomes positive. So you're going to have this. You could either write it like that, or you could write n plus 15 like I just did, okay? And the 19, I'm going to bring it down, okay? Now I'm still trying to get n by itself, so I'm going to get rid of the 15 by subtracting 15 from both sides. And yeah, no problem. I'm just recording a video. No problem, no problem. Okay. Okay, the quicker way of doing this problem would be like this. Since I see that there's no number in front of the n except for that invisible 1, and n is negative, I want it to be positive. So what I could do is just move it to the left. If I move it to the left, it's going to become positive because I'm adding n to both sides of the inequality. Okay, so when I move it to the left, it'll become this. All I did is do this to both sides. You don't have to write that step out. You could just do it mentally. But move the n to the left. Okay, which will give you this right here. Okay, now just move the 15 to the right by subtracting from both sides. So n is greater than 4. Okay, so here's my 4, and all the numbers greater than are to the right. Okay, there's my graph. We have about 2 more examples that I'm going to do. So on this one, I'm trying to get the variable c by itself. So as I've said before, the number that's with the variable, I move last. I'm first going to get rid of the minus 3 by adding 3 to both sides. When I add 3 to both sides, I'll have 4. And on the right hand side, I'll have c divided by negative 2. Now to get rid of that negative 2, I'm going to do the opposite of dividing by 2, which will be multiplying both sides by negative 2. If I multiply both sides by negative 2, all right, these cancel out, and the sign has to flip directions because you're multiplying both sides by a negative number. So the sign is going to flip to that. Okay, on this side I have c, and negative 2 times positive 4 is going to give me negative 8. So if I write my answer starting with the c is less than negative 8. And the graph of that would be, here's negative 8. I do not shade inside the circle because it cannot equal negative 8. And all the numbers less than negative 8 are to the left. So there's my graph. Okay, on this one, I got to solve for the variable b. So again, the number that's with the variable, I'm going to move last. The first thing I'm going to get rid of is the minus 93 by adding 93 to both sides. Okay, now here, I want to get rid of that 91, which is multiplying with the b. So I'm going to do the opposite of multiplying by 91, which will be dividing by 91. But I want to point out, before you reach for a calculator, especially for the students that struggle with multiplication, we haven't had any decimals so far. Chances are, whatever number you have here, it divides perfectly into whatever number's here without any remainder. Okay, this is 91 and this is 182. It should be obvious that if you try 91 times 2, that actually will give you 182. So you don't need to reach for a calculator. When I divide by 91, 182 divided by 91, I'm going to get 2. Sorry about that. I'm going to get 2. So my answer is going to be b is less than or equal to positive 2. You should be able to look at 91 and do mental math. If you multiply 2 times 1, you get 2, and 2 times 9, you get 18. So b is less than or equal to positive 2. Here's positive 2. Since it could be equal to positive 2, I'm going to shade inside the circle. And all the numbers less than are to the left. And notice I changed it and wrote it starting with the b, but I kept the relationship with the signs the same. The relationship with which side is smaller and which side is bigger, I kept it the same when I rewrote it. So there's my graph. And this should be the last example. In this example, I'm trying to get c by itself. So first thing I'm going to get rid of is the 98 by subtracting both sides by 98. That'll give me a 2 on the left and negative 2c on the right. Now I'm going to get rid of the negative 2, which is currently multiplying. I'm going to get rid of it by doing the opposite of multiplying by negative 2, which is divide both sides by negative 2. When I divide both sides by negative 2, that's going to cause the sign to flip. So the sign is going to flip directions like that. 2 divided by negative 2 is negative 1, because a positive divided by a negative equals a negative, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. Here, these two negative 2's that you're dividing by cancel out. So there's my answer. Let me write it starting with the c. c is greater than negative 1. So that's my answer. And the graph would be, here's negative 1. I do not shade inside the circle, and all the numbers greater than negative 1 are to the right. So there's my graph. Okay, and that's the last example. So your assignment is going to be in IXL section K9, graphing solutions to two-step linear inequalities. Remember, you got to reach 100 points.